Hmm. Oh man.
I think we are live now. Welcome everybody. My name is Ramon Gill, and I'm the organizer of the Diversity Comic Con here at Fashion Institute of Technology. And today we are very honored to have as our keynote speaker, Sean Martinborough. And I'm doubly honored because Sean also did the commencement address at my daughter's graduation from LaGuardia High School a few weeks back. And so I'm getting a double whammy here. I'm getting a double dose of Sean. So I'm very excited. Just a little background, the Diversity Comic Con started 3 years ago. It's funded by the Diversity Council at Fashion Institute of Technology. And with that, I'd like to thank Dr. Joyce Brown, our president, and Dr. Ron Milan, who is the Chief Diversity Officer. And I'm really sorry that he's missing this because the reason why we have this Diversity Comic Con, Sean, is because he is a big Batman fan.
Ah,
So without further ado, Sean is going to be, as I said, going to be giving us our keynote, and this is addressed to all the aspiring artists out there, especially the students at FIT. So I will give it to Sean, and
okay.
you're on.
Thanks, Ramon. Hello, everybody, and thank you for having me. It's an honor to be invited to speak at the Comic Con, sponsored by the FIT Council on Diversity. Listen, I know that we're in these very strange times these days where we are kind of stuck inside. We really can't socialize and travel and do as much as we can, but that can be a good thing. Just to give a little background on myself, I'm a native New Yorker. I live in the Washington, D.C. area now, but I went to the Fiorello LaGuardia High School of Music and Art, and then I graduated from SVA with a Bachelor's of Fine Arts degree. And then since then, I've gone on to work for Marvel Comics, DC Comics. I've worked on characters like Batman, Luke Cage, the Black Panther, Hellboy. I worked alongside Robert Kirkman, the creator of The Walking Dead, on a series called Thief of Thieves. And pretty much, I've been pretty fortunate to be working as a professional artist ever since I graduated college, which is can be a little bit of a tricky feat. But I think one of the exciting things I think about for you guys is that, right now you're sort of at the beginning, and that's a very exciting time as an artist. I remember back when I went to SVA. Now, SVA was sort of like, a couple blocks down from you guys, and then we had campuses on the east side. And I remember hanging out with friends at FIT all the time, and I used to sort of schlep across town and hang out at the FIT, the building, which is really cool. And listen, aside from the very pretty girls that were in attendance, one of the really cool things about SVA or going to a different college was sort of looking at how fashion approached art and fashion approached storytelling. And I'm a huge comic book fan. I love comics ever since I was a little kid, Marvel Comics, DC Comics. And that inspired me to, draw my own characters and stories to this day. But storytelling is the thread that ties so many different art forms together. And it actually brings people together from different walks of life. And one of the interesting things that I always enjoyed about going over to visit FIT is just the way fashion would tell a story and the different inspirations that the designers would have when it came to just everyday things that you and I, well, us average people who are not fashion inclined, would take for granted. Just the approach of a shirt or a dress or just average everyday clothing. Those different inspirations would come from so many different places. And I think that's the great thing about art, is that art inspires art, and people pick up so many different great ideas from so many different places outside of their own circles. And so that's something that I carry through into my own artwork as well. I would always go to the museum, or always go if I traveled. And actually nowadays, now that we're all stuck inside, we really can't go anyplace, I encourage you guys just to take a walk around your block and really pay attention to different things that you might overlook on an average every day. Pay attention to maybe like the way the sidewalk, like the way the pavement on the sidewalk is designed, maybe a lamppost, maybe the color of a building, the color of a brick, the way a plant might hang down. There's so many inspirations around us, which is basically diversity. That's like the heart of it, which is just a differences. The differences around us really can inspire us. And if you think of all of like your favorite artists or designers, they were always inspired by something else, something different. And that's one of the things that I've always found inspiring with regard to wherever I tell a story, if I ever design a character, is just to sort of pull from different experiences that I've had, be it traveling, be it talking to people. And listen, as you'll come to learn, I like to talk, but there's also a part of me that likes to sort of just be quiet and listen and really just seek out information from people that are different than me, that people that have a different experience than what I had, because having a different perspective inspires your ideas. It inspires creativity. And I think that's one of the things I really enjoyed about visiting FIT and visiting other colleges or different other places, or just even like, average everyday institutions, just sort of interacting with different people and sort of seeing a different way of thinking and translating that different way of thinking into my art form. I think is maybe a much better artist, a much more creative person. And then that being inspired by these different thinkers would inspire me to represent those thinkers, because a lot of times people will sort of borrow something and not really credit where they are drawing their inspiration from. And I think that's what's so important about the concept of diversity and representation, is simply representing the world around you. Because yes, you might have a group of friends that you guys might all look the same, you might all come from the same background, but there is a world outside of you that can be so much more stimulating. So I definitely, encourage everybody to sort of, as an exercise, step outside of your comfort zone, step outside of like your circle of friends or even your neighborhood, and sort of, just walk around and experience the differences in our society. Because I think that the people that really get the benefit to differences, to diversity, to representation, those are the people that are making the most interesting, creative projects out there. So I definitely encourage that. I encourage everybody who's tuning in to kind of keep that thinking in mind, to sort of, always be looking for something different, because that's what's going to grab your eye. When you're either walking down the street or walking into a store or whatever, that different thing, it might throw you at first. You might be like, what the hell is that? But the fact that it got your attention, I think that's what we all want as artists, to be able to grab people's attention and make them think. And they might have a negative reaction. They might have a positive reaction. But as artists, I think what we all want is a reaction. So that's sort of like my spiel. And I always try to sort of incorporate this into my work. Like I said, if it's Batman or if it's the Black Panther, I did a project for Comixology recently called Prométhée 1313, which is based on a very popular series of French bande dessinées, which is their graphic novels. That's on Comixology. And I was really able to sort of, with my writer, Andy Diggle, design a whole bunch of new interesting characters in this sci-fi invention. I recently was a contributor to the very special The Fire issue of Vanity Fair, which was all about Breonna Taylor and talking about, social issues and reform. And I was very honored to be tapped to be a part of that. And what did I do? I tapped into my background of sort of just pulling diverse imagery together to make a very compelling image. And that was a very cool project. And I talk about this in my TED Talk, where I literally talk about how I grew up as a kid from the Bronx, went to public junior high, then I went to Fiorello LaGuardia Music and Art, went to School of Visual Arts, then became a professional artist. And then I really talked about how growing up in like the 70s and the 80s, there really wasn't that much representation and diversity in media with regard to film and television and comics. And I always thought that was weird, because being a native New Yorker, I mean, you walk down the street and there's like a zillion different types of people. And that inspired me whenever I told my own stories, to sort of make that more reflective of the world around me. And so that's how diversity and representation really plays into my thinking and what I try to push out there. Because like I said, there's so many different ways of thinking, and there's so many people that inspire ideas, and it just seems only right to represent the diversity of those thinkers. So, once again, this has been I'm very excited to sit here and talk with you guys. I look forward to any questions that you guys have. So, Sean Martin, bro, and thank you for listening to my keynote address. And hopefully I inspired you to maybe think about some things. So let's open up to questions. Ramon, where are you?
Hey, thanks so much. That was very, very insightful, Sean. I'm a big believer in always just, like looking at things from different perspectives.
Cool. Well, thank you, Ramon. Your check is in the mail.
Okay. Anyway, so I do have a few questions here already. So the first question, I think I don't know, Paul asked, is that what's the biggest difference in the industry, working in the industry, from when you first started to today?
Well, you know what the biggest difference is the rise of movies and television and adaptations of comic books. Because back in the day when I was reading comics, you had maybe like your Superman movie, I think and we're talking about in the 80s. That just shows how old I am. See this, Greg? But also you had your Superman movie, you had your Superman movie, your Batman movie, but there wasn't this whole dominance of movies today. And that's something that's really made my industry even more exciting, because these days Hollywood is looking for graphic novels, and not just superheroes. They're looking for original stories by original creators, wherever they can. And so that's a very exciting thing about creating stories and original characters in the comic industry in 2020, as opposed to back in the 80s. And there's a lot more of an awareness of what we do and the importance and the value of being a creator.
Okay, my next question is, do you have an ultimate dream project, and can you share a little bit about it?
Well, I don't have one. I have I've been dreaming ever since I was in elementary school in terms of my different stories. But I think one of the projects I'm working on now is called The Heavy. It's a creator-owned graphic novel that I'm writing and drawing for Abrams Books. You can see some of the artwork behind me, hopefully not in focus because it hasn't come out yet. But this is a very personal project for me. It's an original story. It's a contemporary crime noir story that I think it touches on a lot of interesting themes that I find interesting. And so that's something that I'm working on, in addition to other projects that are in various stages of development and deal making. So yeah, so actually I have to say, like, knock on wood, I'm living the dream right now.
Okay. Here's another one. There seems to be like
you sound good to me.
Okay. Anyways, do you have secret tip technique that you use as an artist that you don't see a lot of people doing?
A secret technique?
Or tip. A shortcut you came up with in the course of your career that you think you came up with yourself, that you do that you don't see a lot of other people doing?
I don't know. That's a very interesting question. I don't think there's any trick or secret technique that I have. I feel like as an artist, I'm always trying to get better. So if you look at work that I've done in the past, hopefully you'll see some progression. So I'm not sure if there are any shortcuts that I do. I think that I'm always trying to sort of learn. I'm always looking at other work in the comic book space, as well as the general illustration space. I'm influenced by movies, television, advertisements, photography, like life around me. So like there's not, I don't know, that I think, I don't know, I can't, there's no like secret tip to like how to draw something, a certain way. You know what I mean? It's all about sort of picking up or pulling things from various things around me. That's the best I can do. I'm sorry.
Here's another good one. Your career has mainly been in mainstream comics, meaning Marvel, DC, that kind of stuff. Do you see, or how do you feel about the emerging original graphic novel market that's aimed mainly towards wider audiences and children?
Oh, it's great. I mean, anything that expands the audience beyond typical comic book fans is great, because that just makes more people, that just creates a wider audience for the medium. And a wider audience a lot of times will promote a greater understanding and respect for the medium. So that's really exciting, actually. And then and it just the bigger the sphere, the more the diversity of ideas and stories will be welcomed and hopefully embraced. You know.
Okay.
So it's a really exciting time to sort of like, for original voices and stories to come out. Like it's so many great things that are outside of the traditional superhero genre.
Okay, here's another one. I like this one. Whoa, what is that? What is one brutally hold on. What is one brutally honest piece of advice that you would give to an artist starting out?
Do not show if you're looking for advice on your work, don't show it to your friends and family because they love you. And a lot of times they don't want to argue with you and they don't want to hurt your feelings. So show your work to professionals as much as you can because they're the ones that are going to say, okay, well, you know what? This is what you might have wrong with it. You know what I mean? So yeah, like I said, don't show any of your work to your friends and your family. I mean, listen, you can, but don't let that be your main source of critique and feedback because a lot of times they're not going to be artistically literate. Like I love my mom and my dad, but I would not ask them for advice on a page of storytelling. Although that, I would ask them in a very basic way, like, okay, can you follow what the story is? And what do you think about that? But in terms of technical advice, I wouldn't ask them that because that's not within their sphere, Also, a brutally piece of advice for students, and this is probably more brutal to your parents if they're footing the bill for your time at FIT, is that your degree is kind of meaningless in the professional sphere. Yeah, because I cannot think of any person, I can't think of any situation where I ever got a job because of where I went to school. Art directors, people that are going to hire you, editors, they don't care. That could be conversation after you get the job or if you're sitting in the office or if you went to lunch somewhere. But all they care about is how good you are and can you meet your deadlines. It's a little, yeah.
Let me ask you this as a follow-up question, and I'm not disagreeing with you, but would you say that having gone to school though makes you a more well-rounded person, which helps you as a creator?
Yes, no, and here's the thing that it's a catch-22 because having a degree is almost mandatory. A basic bachelor's degree is mandatory in this economy in terms of like looking for a job. So if you ever want to look for something outside of the art field, that's where that degree will help you. Also, going to school, like I said before, being around so many different people from so many different walks of life, that's going to benefit you not only as a person, but as an artist. So that's where school really does have its merits. You know what I mean? And like they say, in high school, they say, oh yeah, if you goof off, you're only hurting yourself. Okay, not so much in high school. In college, yeah, because you're paying for that. So if you want to spend money at a college and then goof off for 2 or 3 years, okay, but you're only hurting yourself because now you got to pay back those loans for a big hangout. When you go to college, your main mission should be to soak up as much information and training as you possibly can. So really, your degree is so on you with regard to what you get out of it. But when you walk into an office to get a job, they don't care about your degree.
It's interesting that you said that when you goof off, you're only hurting yourself. One of my students recently shared an amazing gold nugget with a class. And what she said was, somewhere out there, someone is waiting to read your story. So by goofing off and by not telling your stories, somebody's missing out. Somebody might really need to hear your stories, and if you're not working towards that goal, you're depriving somebody. And I thought that was kind of a nice little inspirational message there.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of truth to that. And I think that also if you're goofing off, someone else is going to take your slot.
Yeah.
I mean, seriously, like the amount of competition that is out there for artists is insane. So if you're goofing off, there's someone else that's working on their craft. And so you're only hurting yourself because if you're not at the level that they're at, then you're not going to be able to compete. And you're not only competing with the people in your classroom at FIT, you're competing with every other art student in Manhattan. You're competing with every other art student around the world. You know what I mean? And outside of America, they really take art seriously. You go to South America, you go to Europe, you go to Asia, you find some of the most amazing draftsmen and women. So yeah, the competition level is really high. So that's something that you want to consider if you're goofing off. Now, listen, I mean, I'm all for goofing off. Sometimes we all need a break, but you can never lose sight of the fact that this is a competition. Yeah.
Here's a question from Rob. I see behind you that your style is very much black and white with very little shading.
Mhm.
Was this a natural progression or a definite decision?
Yeah, I think it was a natural progression. I think that when I was growing up and reading comics, I loved so many different artists with so many different styles. But then as I got a little bit older, I started sort of settling into one particular approach that really gravitated to me. And that was more of like a stark, high contrast, noir type approach that you could find in Alex Toth or Milton Caniff or Frank Miller or Mike Mignola or David Mazzucchelli. And to me, that type of approach really influenced how I would compose images. So yeah, I mean, although like I got my degree in painting in School of Visual Arts, and my actual first professional work was fully painted work for Marvel. I was doing fully painted illustrations. I did a fully painted graphic novel, but that's kind of expensive, so they kind of phased that out. So then I really started inking, and I really just started, working in black and white a lot more, and that was sort of the natural progression to the point where I was, suggested that I put out an art instruction book, which is How to Draw Noir Comics, the art and technique of visual storytelling, which is really a window into how I see things in black and white and high contrast and using shadow and light to create dramatic images.
You actually alluded to this already just now, but how did you break into the industry?
Well, way, 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 way back in like 1992, when there was only one comic book convention in town, and that was the New York Comic Con. And this is way before the internet was invented. So we artists had to put photocopies of our work into leather-bound portfolio cases that we would schlep around and show to people to get work. And one of the places that you could show people your work was the New York Comic Con. And Marvel and DC, they would send editors, they would have booths there, and they would send editors there to look for new talent. And so I went to the New York Comic Con, I had my portfolio, I waited on a line at Marvel, and I showed my work to an editor, and he liked what he saw, and he gave me his card and said, give me a call. And so I called him, went in for, I met with him, and then he gave me my first professional, fully painted work. And I started, and that's how I really got into the business. And then from then on, I just, started working for Marvel. And then the thing about Marvel and DC is that they're competitors. So if you start working for Marvel, all of a sudden DC's like, hey, what's going on over there? Once you start working for DC, Marvel's like, hey, what's going on over there? So I really bounced back and forth between Marvel and DC Comics for a while. And that's pretty much how my career started.
Here's another question. Have you ever worked with any of your heroes? I think what they mean by heroes is like other creators, not necessarily superheroes.
Yeah, I think the first thing that comes to mind is drawing a Hellboy story with Mike Mignola. Mike Mignola is like a huge influence of mine. I love, everything of his, and he had invited me to draw a Hellboy story, and I was just like, whoa, are you serious? Yeah, that was amazing. Right now, on my graphic novel that I'm doing for Abrams Books, I'm working alongside veteran letterer John Workman. And for those of you who don't know, lettering is its own art form that I think doesn't get as much credit as it deserves. John Workman worked alongside Walt Simonson on his classic Thor run in the 80s. And for all of you civilians, those Thor movies that have made like $1 billion, a lot of that stuff is based on that run of Walt Simonson's from the 80s. And John Workman was his letterer, and he did some of the most amazing fonts for that. And so to be working with him on my words, the script that I wrote, and seeing him, translate my words into lettering it just blows me away. And then whenever he gives me a compliment on the storytelling, I'm like, get out of here, John, are you serious? Thank you so much. So I think I just working with different people that you respect has been really fun, and then when, if you get like an accolade or a compliment from those people, you're like, whoa, are you serious? Like, you're you.
You mentioned that you're working on this graphic novel for Abrams. So what's the difference between working for Marvel slash DC and working for a traditional publisher like Abrams? And I just don't mean just contract wise, but also process wise and just the whole relationship thing.
You know what? It's not that different. So, for example, when I did the deal with Abrams for my graphic novel, I had to. It's a 160 page graphic novel, so I had to write a 160 page script first, which they had to approve, and that was actually really pretty seamless. I mean, I got thrown off schedule wise by like some personal life stuff. But once I got into the groove of writing the script, they were really happy with it. They gave me very minimal notes and they approved it, and now I'm drawing it. Contrast that with I was approached by the Batman office to write a 2-part Red Hood story, which is coming out in November. They actually asked me if I'd be interested in writing and drawing a Red Hood story, but I told them I'm too busy drawing, but I'd be interested in writing something. So I pitched the editor the idea, and he went for it. I was really surprised that he just was like, okay, cool. That sounds great. And I gave him, I think I did like maybe 1 or 2 drafts with him, but that was really interesting and cool to work with an editor that, knows his salt. Ben Abernathy is a shout out. Ben's been really great to work with. So yeah, it hasn't been that different. I mean, the only thing is, the big difference is that I'm working with an established character with regard to like the DC Comics stuff. Although I am introducing a bunch of new characters that I'm creating and introducing to the Batman DC universe. But the main character, Red Hood, is an established character. So I don't have as much leeway to sort of create with him that I would with my project for Abrams, which is all me. So that's all me. The story's all me. I can say whatever I want, and I have complete freedom there. So that's like the big difference. But process-wise, it's been they've been very similar in terms of, just people really enjoying what I'm giving them and then collaborating and taking their notes. And there's certain notes that you take. There are other notes that you can kind of argue, but that's all part of the creative process.
Okay, here's an interesting one. This journey of you being a comic book artist, has it been something that you planned out and it's gone according to plan? Or was it kind of like, lucky breaks here and there? And where do you see yourself in about 10 years?
Well, it did go according to plan because I knew that I wanted to be a professional comic book artist in high school. A friend of mine had at LaGuardia, he was a fellow art major, and he was like, hey, I'm taking this really cool comic book class up in Harlem. It's free. So I said, okay, cool. So I went along with him, and that's where I met my 2 mentors. This was at a place called the Children's Art Carnival, which was a nonprofit organization up in Harlem, and they would have Black professionals come in and teach courses. One was a cartooning class, one was a illustration class, photography class, and video class, all free. And that's where I met my 2 mentors that I will always acknowledge. One was Gil Ashby. Gil taught the illustration class. The other one was Michael Davis, who taught cartooning. And they had extremely yin-yang approaches to art. Gil was the purist. He was like, you have to learn how to draw. You have to, know perspective. Davis was like, this is a business. It's a hustle. You got to hustle. You got to hustle. Which was amazing because art schools never teach you about the business aspect of being an artist. And what Davis did, which was amazing, is that he would introduce his students to friends that he knew in the comic industry. So here I am in high school, and I'm meeting people like Walt Simonson, Louise Simonson, Bill Sienkiewicz, Dennis Cowan. People whose work you're reading in comics, but you're meeting them, fleshed, in the flesh. And they were all so great. I'm friends with all of them to this day. And I'm like, wow, I can't believe that I'm a colleague of theirs, which is kind of crazy. But I say all that to say that showed me that it could be done, that you could make a living as a comic book artist because I'm seeing these people in the flesh. So high school, I knew that that's what I wanted to do. And then once I went to college, I just went to School of Visual Arts because it was all about honing my craft, because that's what it's all about, just trying to get better, getting better at every stage. So by the time I was in SVA and I was like a junior, I said, I'm determined to try to get professional work before I graduate because I didn't want to be part of the herd. So I didn't want to be looking for a job when everybody else is looking for a job right after you graduate in senior year. So I was determined to sort of get a head start on that, which is why I started showing my portfolio around when I was a junior. And then I got my first professional work when I was a junior in college. And so from there, applying the sort of hustle mentality, which is always kind of looking to set yourself up, because as a freelancer, that's how you survive. You have job after job after job after job. Because if there's a gap, then there's a problem when you have to pay your rent. So, you have to constantly be thinking ahead. But then you apply the other purest part, which is the get factor, which is you want to hone your craft, get better. And of course, listen, nothing ever works out according to plan. There are times where work was thin, where I wasn't getting work. And then that forced me to have to diversify and look for work outside of comics. And that was a really great move. And that's really what inspired me to do my an art instruction book, How to Draw and Art Comics, because I knew that being a published author would get my style out to people outside of the comic industry. And that led to so many different opportunities with regard to people approaching me to either lecture or appear at conventions or do projects that are outside of comics. So now I work in comics and I work outside of comics. And my dream is always to tell stories on a greater scale. So I love to draw comics. That's where it started. So that's what I'm doing now. But then it's beyond comics, which is television, animation, film. And that's what I'm segueing into as well.
Got it. There's a lot of advice, professional advice right there. But the next question is actually, do you have any other business advice? You talked about brutally honest advice, and your keynote was something inspiring to students. But what other advice can you give on the business side of being an illustrator or a comic book illustrator?
Okay, dealing with contracts. Do not get over your fear of lawyers. I think every artist should work with a lawyer to review your contracts, because we live in a world of laws, and laws are written by lawyers. And unfortunately, a lot of times that's something else that we're really not taught in art school, which is navigating contracts and doing that kind of business. So what I would suggest is to make a relationship with a lawyer that you can work with, so that if you're in a situation where you're offered a job, you have someone that can read that contract and look out for you and protect your rights. Also, to make sure that you get paid, because I've heard many stories, and luckily, knock on wood, I have not experienced any of this, but many times you'll hear the stories where someone did a job and they didn't get paid for it. And I'm like, well, did you have a contract? And like, well, no. And that's what contracts are for. They are to sort of legally bind someone to doing what they are committing to do. And if you're going to spend time to work on an art piece for them or design, then you need to have some kind of recourse to get paid. So that's number one, to sort of build a relationship with a lawyer that you can have to review your contracts. Second thing is to really overcome this fear that most artists have when it comes to valuing your work. This is something else that we're not taught in schools, but this comes to negotiating. A lot of us are like, well, people will say, well, okay, well, I'm looking for an artist. What do you charge? And that's an old dance that, so I'm always like, well, what's your budget? And that forces them to start with a number. And then you always have to ask for more. And as an artist, you have to get comfortable asking for more, and negotiating and saying, listen, this is what I'm worth and this is what I want. And so getting in that negotiating mindset is so key. This is going to sound like a joke, but I recommend this to everybody. There's a series on Bravo television called $1 Million Listing. Now, listen, I love watching these shows because it's interesting looking at the different houses that are on the market, but it's all about real estate agents that sell property, and they have $1 million listing New York, they have $1 million listing LA. The reason why I suggest watching this, and a lot of this is for the camera, but these real estate agents are always negotiating on prices of property. And getting in that mentality of negotiating is something that can be extremely, extremely important for an artist. So just getting in the habit of negotiating and asking for more, because you always got to figure you ask for more, because if you're negotiating, you're going to kind of meet in the middle somewhere. And so those are the 2 points that I definitely would suggest. Create a relationship with a lawyer that can help you review your contracts, and get into the habit of negotiating when it comes to asking for money and get over that fear that we artists tend to have about asking for too much or maybe devaluing what we think our art is worth.
Great. I think that's all that we have time for.
All right, you sure? I'm here. I'm here if anybody has questions.
Okay, one last question, and it is
I'm answering all questions here. I'm doing a Joe Biden, so I'm answering all questions.
we have Teresa is lamenting that she wishes that she had the opportunity to take comic making classes as a kid. So what would you advise somebody who's very young on what they could do right now to help their careers along in the future?
Well, here's the thing. I never took I never took a formal cartooning class. I just started reading comics when I was in elementary school, and then when I was in junior high, I would just sort of copy the comic books that I would buy at the store. When I went to LaGuardia High School of Music and Art, I was trained in traditional art things like painting, drawing from life, still lifes, that kind of stuff. They didn't offer any cartooning classes at LaGuardia. And I think School of Visual Arts did offer a cartooning class, but I never took it. So I really took the basics that I would learn from just overall generalized art courses and apply that to comics. So what I would suggest for you is that if you love comic books, I would really, now there are tons of books out there now. If you want to do a Google search on Amazon, like DC has a series of books on how to letter, how to pencil, how to write, and all that stuff. There are tons of books that are out there that are going to help you. But I think that for what I would definitely recommend is, first of all, you have to strengthen your drawing. So I would always suggest drawing from life. I use myself as a reference model all the time, or I'll look up reference on the Google. That's invaluable. And I also look at storytelling by other artists because I'm like, wow, that's really interesting how they figured out how to tell that story. So that's a great learning technique. So I would definitely say a combination of practicing drawing from life and then looking at how other people tell a story is probably better than, if you want to track down a cartooning class and spend the money on that, you can. But I think that those are two of the foundations that I think will serve you very well.
And let's do one last question.
We're doing all the questions, Ramon. All the questions.
I wish. We're limited for time. But here's a good one. Any advice for somebody who is getting into comics later in life? Jen grew up in the 70s and 80s. Any words of advice for somebody who wants to get into comic books at this age?
Well, here's the thing. Like, if you apply what I just said about sort of like studying the foundation of drawing and looking at how other people tell stories, the cool thing is that you can be 100 years old and work for Marvel or DC Comics or do your own comic book. They don't care how old you are. They just care whether or not you're good and can you meet your deadlines. So that's the great thing. There's no ageism in comics. I think as an artist, at least, maybe writing, I don't know. I don't think so. But they don't really care. They just care whether or not you can do the job. So that's the great thing about it. You can start at any age. You just have to really hone your craft so that you can be competitive with regard to either writing or drawing.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Sean. Really appreciate you coming out and doing this again.
Are we done for the year, or are we coming back for a three-peat before the year's out?
Oh, we're gonna do it again at some point. So,
okay.
I want to get you live. Next time you're in New York City, you gotta let me know.
I tell you, man, I haven't been to New York since last December, which is crazy. I've never been away from New York this long, but these crazy times. So
yeah, it is crazy. So, but I'm glad you're getting out there on your bike and you're getting to go outside, and you inspire me to do the same thing.
It is the cheapest form of therapy. I totally recommend it. And so definitely thanks so much, Ramon, for inviting me to be on to speak at the Diversity Comic Con. Big ups to FIT. It's like my school away from school. The SVA, of course, will be number one, but it's been a pleasure talking with all of you guys, and best of luck, and take a walk outside and sort of look at things try to see things in a different way, or notice things that you would not normally notice, and you'll draw really cool inspiration.
Again, for you guys, if you're at home, give Sean a nice round of applause. Thank you very much. Okay.